Hi, it's Kristen and it is International Women's Day, so I thought I'd recommend some books. So all of these books are either like by women or about women, um, and I just think are like important stories that I wanted to talk about. The first book I want to talk about is one of the most recent books I have read. I read it with my book club. We tend to read books by women and books that talk about the relationships between women. It's like our favourite kinds of books to read. And we recently read The Lion Women of Tehran by Marjane Kamali. This is a book about two women and it's follows them from their childhood, becoming friends, to their teenage life and relationship, then their like early 20s, and then years later reconnecting as like grown women in their 30s. It just focuses on them and their friendship and a betrayal that happens between them. It's quite political. One of our main characters gets very involved in like this little communist party and protests, while our other main character tries to sort of stay out of that. And so there's tension between them in their friendship because of politics, but also just this like story of uh, love throughout their lives, and like relationships between mothers and daughters and sisterhood, and how that is affected by like cultural stuff, the politics of their country, which it's all set in Iran, which feels like incredibly prevalent and important at the moment. And then sort of how men in their lives also affect their internal lives and their relationships with each other. It was just really interesting. I really want to read more from this author. I thought it was a great way to like learn about a country that I don't know a ton about, but it never felt like it was teaching me in a like force-fed or condescending kind of way. It just felt like a very natural learning as I read about these women in their lives. So that one was great. I highly recommend that. It was like well liked amongst our book club, and I have a Feminist Friday video coming all about that book. It's also interesting to learn about like the history of Iran, because it starts in, I want to say, the 50s, and we go through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, sort of into present day. So we cover a lot of ground. We see like the revolution and yeah, lots of things at play. So it was a very intense, sad at points read. I would be maybe like careful going into it if you're affected by like stories about war, or storylines to do with sexual assault. Next up, I would like to talk about Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. This one, again, trigger warnings for sexual assault, murder, just like a lot of misogyny in the way that women are treated by men and within the justice system. This is set in the 70s and is about a serial killer who breaks into this sorority house and assaults and injures violently and murders various different members of this sorority, and then the sorority like house leader trying to get justice for her friends, and she comes into contact with another woman whose life has been affected by this man because he killed her friend. And so, yeah, it's about women trying to get justice and this man just getting away with a lot of stuff. We do get court scenes, so he is like apprehended, but then the treatment of the women in the courtrooms is really difficult to read. This was sort of like based on the Ted Bundy case, but I do think it's handled quite carefully and with a lot of consideration for women, and this does like really center the victims and survivors of this like fictionalized version of that case, and is like infuriating to read at points because of the way that like the male lawyers like talk to these women and try to like discredit them, but also you do get like the killer being able to like talk as well, but he is never named in here. He's always just like the man. But I think this is really interesting to look at for, you know, women getting justice, and the relationships that women who have been affected by the same sorts of things come together. And I really I didn't enjoy this, but liked this. It was one of my favourite books of last year. Next up, we have another favourite book of mine that I read for book club, and that is The Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff. This is one that I really enjoyed, and my friend Robin really enjoyed. But the rest of the book club, not so much. But I just thought this was like very fun, deals with serious topics, but is very fun. This is about a woman who lives in this village, and everyone thinks that she had a hand in killing her husband, which she didn't, but she sort of lets everyone think that because they don't bother her. If as long as they believe that, they like leave her to it, until this woman comes to her and says like, hey, you killed your husband, right? Can you help me kill my husband? And she sort of goes along with it, and it's very much about several women in this village coming together over difficult circumstances. There are elements in here of like abuse from husbands towards their wives, and obviously like the main storyline is to do with, you know, potentially murdering people, so there is that. But again, this I had a lot of fun with. It was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2023, and that's how I first heard about it, and just that premise really intrigued me. It gets a little bit outlandish towards the end, but in a way that I enjoyed, because I was like, I'm along for the ride, I'm gonna have fun with this book. And so I liked it. So if that premise sounds fun to you and you're like just willing to like go with the story, I think you could like this one too. Next up, this I'm not recommending this necessarily as like a feminist story, but I'm recommending this as I think this female character is very interesting and nuanced kind of thing, and that is Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati. This is the story of Clytemnestra in Greek mythology. She was the wife of Agamemnon, and she is such an interesting character. I didn't know a ton about her. I just knew her like vaguely as like the wife of Agamemnon, the mother of Electra and Iphigenia, the sister of Helen, but I didn't really know much about her. And I think Costanza Casati does a really interesting job of like fleshing her out as a person, and yeah, giving her a lot of nuance, giving her a lot of intricacies to her character, and this like ultimately like tragic story that she lives through her life. And so if you like Greek mythology, if you like books about female rage, highly recommend this one, because there is a lot of female rage in here. So yeah, I don't really have much more to say about that. Again, one of my favourite books of last year. So very much think people should read that. Then we have The Once and Future Witches by Alix E. Harrow. This is a story of sisterhood, of magic. It's these three sisters who grew up with like magic and witchcraft sort of in their lives, then something happens to completely tear their family apart, and years later they end up coming back together and sort of starting their own coven in amongst the like rising suffragist movement, which really intrigued me as a premise because I was like, witches, interesting, suffragist movement, interesting, combine those things, it's my perfect book. I thought the sisters really felt like their own separate characters. I really got a distinct feeling of who each of them were, and their relationships with each other, their relationships with other people, their relationship with witchcraft, and also like the witchcraft itself, the magic and the world building was really interesting to me. And this I just got swept up in it and really enjoyed the story, and yeah, rebuilding this sisterhood and facing men in their town and trying to survive in a world that hates witches but also hates women. And yeah, I just had a really good time with this book. So if you like witches, if you like history, this is set in the like late 1800s, and you like fantastical stories, then I would highly recommend this one. Then we have another book that I read with my book club. Again, we love stories about women and their relationships with other women, so we read Family Law by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is about a bunch of sisters who, all the women in their family have like little powers, like small like elements of magic or mysticism to them, to do with maybe like predicting stuff or feeling things or being able to like control things within their own body, or like taste. And so there's lots of different like little mystic elements in there. This book is like magical realism, and one of these sisters decides to throw a wake for herself, even though she's not yet dead. But it's just like this generational tale of mothers and daughters, sisters, and just all the women in this family and their relationships to each other, their relationships to men in their lives. And it's, yeah, just this big generational tale with this really interesting magical realism element throughout. So that was another good book club read that I probably wouldn't have read without being part of book club. Then I would like to recommend The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. This is a sort of pirate adventure, retired pirate who has to like get back in the game in order to protect her daughter, and that being her like motivation for this whole story. So we have that female bond there. I really enjoy Amina as a character. She's had a very checkered history with men and her crew and the various adventures and scrapes they've gotten into over the years. I really like the friendship between her and her crew, and their like devotion to each other I think is really lovely. If you just want like a fun, magical, fantasy, female pirate captain story, I would highly recommend this one. It's slow in the beginning, I would say, but after a while I really got into it and had a lot of fun with it. I believe it's the first book in a trilogy, so I'm really cannot wait for the other books to come out and I can continue on in this story. But yeah, an interesting, complex female character with like this, yeah, just want and need to protect her daughter, which I think is really lovely. And considering I'm not like hugely into stories of like motherhood, I would say a lot of these books actually do deal with motherhood in like big and small ways, so maybe I'm not as averse to that as I think I am. And lastly, I have a non-fiction book to recommend, and that is Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates. This is several years old now. Even though it came out 12 years ago, I would say still sadly, but not necessarily shockingly, relevant today. Some things are like slightly outdated because obviously it's leaning on stuff that was relevant at the time. So like some of the pop culture references are focused on like 2010 stuff, references to like MPs who are no longer in power or are in different positions of power. This is based on the Everyday Sexism project that Laura Bates set up, where people could write in either like on Twitter or through the Everyday Sexism website about the different accounts of everyday sexism that they had faced. So like men catcalling them on the street, people saying things in school, people saying things in the workplace, just the things that women are expected to do, or the way they're expected to act, or the way they're expected to dress. Laura Bates then took those elements and has like some of those written in here, and then obviously like creates a narrative in each like chapter around those things and gives stats and gives her opinion and just like, yeah, really goes in on these different topics. So throughout there's stuff about like women in politics, motherhood, women in the workplace, women in media. I just found it really compelling and like easy to read. It felt like I was learning a lot and getting a lot of information, but it was told to me in quite a like I don't know, chatty kind of way. It didn't feel confusing, or the language didn't feel too like academic or anything like that. So I thought this was very well written. I really want to read more from Laura Bates because obviously she's written several other non-fiction books, has a lot more like up-to-date ones. She's got some about like AI, she's got stuff about like the manosphere, and yeah, I think as a non-fiction writer, she writes so well and is talking about such interesting topics, and following her on social media is really interesting, to see the stuff she gets involved with and the absolute like backlash that she gets about certain things from men. This one, I think, even though it is like technically is sort of out of date, like I said, a lot of it's still relevant. It's quite a tough read at points because you're just reading these real life accounts of women being treated terribly. But yeah, I think it's incredibly important to read about, and something that we have to like live with, sadly, but also like make people pay attention to and face up to. So that is my non-fiction rec. So those are all the books I'm going to recommend. Again, like for some of them I gave like specific trigger warnings, but like just generally, like sadly, I think a lot of books that are written about women and women's experiences do deal with like misogyny, sexism. Oftentimes stories involve sexual assaults, which is not nice. And even though like I wish it wasn't, that is a big part of a lot of women's lives, so it does pop up in fiction and non-fiction quite a lot. I've recommended like some of these books I found like very fun and enjoyable to read, but that doesn't necessarily mean like the content is fun. Sometimes it just, when a book feels really relatable, like I can have a good time with it even if the content of that book isn't like a bundle of laughs, you know? These other books I would recommend if you want to hear me talk about some of these books more. I think I have reading vlogs of some description for each of these. Some are Feminist Fridays, like the Bandit Queens and Everyday Sexism and The Lion Women of Tehran. Some of these are in other vlogs, like the pirate reading vlog I did, or the Greek mythology reading vlog, or just various other things. So I definitely talk about, I'm pretty sure, all of these elsewhere in more detail, so do go back on my channel and look for those if you'd like to hear even more, or potentially slight spoilers or more of my thoughts like as I was reading them. I would like to do another one of these. I do quite like just randomly recommending books, but considering it is International Women's Day and I do love to read books about women by women, do you have any recommendations for me? Based on the fact that I really liked all of these, what do you think I would otherwise like to read? Do let me know down below, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!